Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our course preview for this week's Valspar Championship. We've got ourselves the Innisbrook Copperhead course, a real tricky track for the last leg of the Florida swing, and going to cover everything you need to know about this venue to go out there and get your research started. So we'll start off with some details about the Copperhead course, talk about the grass types out there, length of the course, par, all of that stuff that you need to know, and then go hole by hole, show you some of the shots that these players are going to be facing, and then towards the end of the video, the real meat and potatoes here are key stats and comp courses that you can use for some of your modeling. The idea here is that by the end, you'll have all the information that you need to go out there and start making some of your plays, whether it's for DFS, betting, all of that. You should have a good idea of which players to favor. So without further ado, a lot to get into here. Let's start it off with some of the course details for the Innisbrook Copperhead course. We've got ourselves a par 71 and maybe the most difficult track out of all of the Florida swing. It'll either be this course or the API that's the most difficult every year. A lot of that coming down to the weather, but just like you had at the API, there is a huge premium on ball striking. A lot of that is with the wooded fairways, the wooded landing areas that you have to deal with around this golf course, but also nearly 4-inch rough, which was lengthened over there in 2023 and is something that is going to stay here for this iteration of the event. So when you miss fairways, you're going to feel it out there, and it's not so much just the length of the rough that causes problems, it's also the angles into greens. When you miss around the Copperhead course, there are trees usually like 5 to 7 yards away from the edge of the fairway, and when you miss, you're not only dealing with thick lies, but oftentimes an impossible shot into the green. When you're in that long rough, it's real hard to put any spin on the golf ball, so when you're blinded out or blocked out to a certain pin location, a lot of times you just have to lay up short of the green. So what ends up happening is some of your more accurate drivers tend to have a lot of success around here, and also because of a lot of those misses leading to missed greens, around the green is a lot more important at this golf course than really any other leg of the Florida swing. So just like all these tracks down here, they all really have their own character and own little aspects that make them unique, but for this week it's really all the trees that you have out here on the golf course which really differentiates it from some of the other venues this time of year. But just like the other weeks here, we do have pretty similar agronomy. It is usually a Bermuda grass base layer, but because of the time of year here, everything is overseeded. So just like we had at the Players, it is a Poa trivialis overseed, and then ryegrass everywhere else. So just like that API rough, it's about that same length as what we had for that week, and the same exact grass type. So if you look at some of the results from that week, I think it could be helpful for trying to find guys that can extract themselves out of it. But this golf course is real difficult, right? It's real tough. You're going to see a scoring average over par for almost all 4 rounds. And with the fact that this is a slightly weaker field than what we had for the last 2 weeks, you're going to see that reflected with some of the scoring. So it's a Larry Packard design, hasn't changed much since its inception back there in 1971. If anything, they've added a little bit of length to this golf course, and then maybe brought the water slightly more into play. So the actual listed length here is 7,340 yards, which doesn't seem all that daunting when it comes to the length perspective, but they do a good job managing that length. You've got some shorter par 4s that supply you a few birdie looks out there, and some of those even play downhill, and then some of your longer par 4s will be in that 450 to 500 yard range, and a lot of times play up the slope as well. So they have a good combination of holes where you'd be happy to make a par at around here, but also holes where you definitely have to go out there and do some scoring. So this 7,300 yards effectively plays a little bit longer than that because of some of the approach distribution, which, speaking of, I'll bring up Data Golf over here. This approach distribution was from 2023, and you'll see that almost all the bottom categories here, or some of your longer iron buckets, are overutilized compared to your PGA Tour average, whereas the gray categories, right, the top categories on this pie chart or percentage chart that we have here, you'll see are lower in terms of their utilization compared to what we're used to seeing on tour. So that is some of that sneaky length that I was talking about. Some of the more difficult holes on property require layups off the tee. to try and keep it out of the long stuff, or to create a bad angle into the greens, which is why you have so many 250 plus yard approaches. You have so many from 200 to 225. 175 to 200 is utilized more than your tour average. A lot of that is baked into the strategy component around the Innisbrook Copperhead course. So a few other things to note here: a ton of bunkers on property, and in fact, the bunkers around this course are a lot more penal than you have compared to the PGA Tour average, whether it's getting up and down out of them. The fairway shots in particular are extremely hard to get up to the green, so just know that some bunkers are easier than others. The ones around the Copperhead course are definitely on the harder end of that spectrum, and a lot of that is because of how deep those are. Water's in play on 9 of the 18 holes, so not quite all 18 like we had for the Players Championship, but still a good amount of water down here, as you'd expect at most Florida golf courses. And the greens are also relatively small, so that would be pretty similar to what we had at the Players Championship, where they were in that 5,000 to 6,000 square foot range. And because of the deep rough, which is even closer to the greens now, after them growing out some of that rough, is only going to make the around the green shots more difficult. So when we take a look at some of the statistical averages, first off, your scoring average over all 4 rounds was nearly a stroke over par last year. You can see with that plus 0.94 average over here in the top left. And then if we go over here to bet the number, of course, that is my number one source for all of this data every single week, you'll see that the fairway average is usually slightly lower than what you have compared to your tour average. Your green and regulation percentage, same thing, right? Slightly lower than your tour average. That actually nearly a whole 7% lower on that aspect. But if we only sort this by last year, so if we remove 2022, if we remove 2021, and just zoom in on what happened with the longer rough, you'll see it was even harder to come by, right? Your winning score was just 10 under par. Your fairway average went down like another 4 or 5%. And your green and regulation percentage was only 55%, or, right there between right around the 10 greens of regulation per round mark, which is not something that we're used to seeing. I mean, there were guys that were hitting less than half their greens out there last year that still went out there and were able to make the cut. So this golf course was already one of the more difficult this time of year, but with that added length, the fact that they can run the greens out here pretty fast with all that tree cover, it's not a link style golf course where they really have to protect against those coastal winds. Because of all the tree cover out there, they can run these at 13 and a half, and you're probably going to see that once again out there by the weekend. So this golf course is an absolute brute, especially since the changes they brought in 2023. And I think you're going to see that going forward. The scrambling percentage went down significantly. If we're only looking over there at last year's results, you had less than 3 birdies per round, over 3 bogeys per round being made by the field out there. Just if you thought API was difficult, if you thought last week was difficult, over there with a 20 under par winner, this week you're going to see even worse than that, potentially something in that 10 to 12 under par range winning. A few other things I want to note on here. So if we go over here and take a look at last year's leaderboard and some of the lead-in form coming in, if we go through this over the last few years, you're going to see a lot of your shots gained putting is de-emphasized. So Taylor Moore's a pretty good putter. He won last year. That certainly bucked the trend a little bit. Guys like Adam Schenk, Sam Burns, of course, are world-class putters. But look at the rest of the top 10, right? Guys that were losing putting like a Jordan Spieth, a Wyndham Clark, right? Usually a really good putter, but was not gaining putting heading into this event. Tommy Fleetwood was just okay with the flat stick. Webb losing strokes. Gribble losing 0.85 strokes per round. And it's not just last year, and I think last year maybe isn't even the best example of this. But if we go back to some of the last, few years over here for the Valspar, I mean, look at this, right? Your biggest gainer was Sam Burns, who, of course, like I said, really good track record here and always a world-class putter. But the rest of this is unimpressive, right? It's guys that are neutral at best with the flat stick. Matt Fitzpatrick pops up, but outside of those 2 players in the top 10, all the dark green is in the tee to green categories. And if we keep going back and just trying to give you guys more and more examples of what we're looking at here, you'll get an idea for why I'm just looking at ball striking this week. So 2021, I don't think they have it here in the database, but let's go back to 2020 and bring up some of that data. Sorry, 2019 is the next year that we can look at here. And in 2019, it's when Paul Casey won this event. This is maybe the most extreme example when it comes to the shots gained metrics. So you'll see Paul Casey was losing a bunch of strokes putting here. Guys like Louis Oosthuizen was in a really bad putting stretch himself. Sungjae Im, Jason Kokrak, right? All this top 5 were guys that could not hit a putt for their lives. Almost all of them on the Live Tour at this point. In fact, everyone but Sungjae, right, is over there on that side of the pond. But look at all these tee to green stats. So that is something that I'm going to be using this week. Putting is de-emphasized in a lot of my modeling. And tee to green play, some course history, right? Guys like Paul Casey have gone back-to-back here. Sam Burns, of course, back-to-back champion himself. But it's not only about the course history angle, right? That can be nice. I think you do see some guys that carry momentum year to year, but it's this ball striking. It's this tee to green that I'm looking at, just like the rest of the Florida swing, right? With all that water in play, just difficult courses in general because of some of the wind you get down here. It usually breeds a lot of ball strikers playing well. So I think this 2019 is the best example of that. If we go back to 2018, we can probably fish around and find a little bit more data to add over here. But yeah, let's look at 2018. So 2018, that was another year that Paul Casey ended up winning this golf tournament. So it's a pretty good chance that a lot of those putters weren't at the top because Paul Casey, right, is not a very consistent putter. It'll load here in just a minute, I would assume. But this golf course, we kind of know what to expect from it. Your winners usually don't make a whole lot of putts at this event, right? Paul Casey was losing. Even Patrick Reed, who's a short game specialist, right, was just about a neutral in that category. Tiger Woods in third place. It's Tiger Woods, right, gaining 0.7 strokes per round. But look at this, right? You got to go the whole way down to the Jim Furyk's, Webbs, and Brandon Graces when it comes to guys that were gaining with the flat stick. I'm much more involved with those tee to green categories this week than really any other category you want to mix in. And Patrick Reed, worth noting, really good course history here. Tiger Woods, of course, has won the Valspar in the past. Patrick Reed was a runner-up to Jordan Spieth when he won in a playoff way back in the day. You see guys that show up here a lot, right? Jason Kokrak, right? Really good course history. Webb Simpson, right? Showing up a whole lot at this course. Paul Casey, Sam Burns, Justin Thomas, Jordan Spieth has always played really good at this golf course. Just something to consider. A little course history, a little tee to green play is going to be a really good strategy for this week. Now we'll real quickly take a look at this golf course and some of the shots they're going to face. So hole number 1, maybe my favorite hole to sit on the entire course. It's a downhill par 5 that is reachable in 2 if you absolutely crush it off the tee. But you got to be aggressive with that tee shot if you want to. So this is set up for a layup back here. I don't think you're going to see many players lay it up. Most are going to try and hit it to this corner where the fairway gets extremely narrow, which is why it's hard to reach this in 2, right? You've got to keep it out of that long 4-inch rough to have any chance of getting it near the green. And even this bunker to the right, which on most tour courses wouldn't be a problem for getting home in 2, because it's such a deep bunker and all the bunkers are so deep around here, most players are going to have to lay up. So it's playing a lot shorter than this 558 yards that we have on paper, but it doesn't mean that it's reachable for the field because of how much precision that you have to have. Hole number 2 is 415 yards. This water to the right shouldn't be in play unless you're an absolute bonehead and end up hitting driver for some reason. Most players will lay up, try to get it to the corner here, and lead themselves something like a 9-iron in. Hole 3 is one where Matt Fitzpatrick completely ejected last year. Hit it OB down the left side twice, I believe. But it's 450 yards. The water does come into play on the right because if you're overly conservative here, you're going to leave yourself like 180 yards in. And you'll see a lot of guys missing over here to the left side. So it's a real tricky tee shot. All right, holes 1 through 3 give you a good idea, especially 1 and 3, right, for that precision that is required around here. And that's really where you separate yourself, right? These greens are small. Approach play is always going to be required. When you miss the around the green shots are real hard here because there are a lot of slopes and undulations that you have on these green complexes. But off the tee is where you can really screw yourself this week. It's where all those big numbers are going to be and where a lot of guys end up missing the cut. Hole 4 is 187 yards, so it's your first par 3. The par 3s here are pretty lengthy, so 187 is actually one of the shorter ones that you're going to get on the whole property, and it's a real narrow green as well. So a really hard green complex to hold. Hole 5 is an uphill par 5, so this plays even longer than 611. So that's what I mean, but the scorecard yardage not really being indicative of what you're getting, right? Hole 1 plays significantly shorter because it's downhill, whereas hole 5 plays like a 650-yard par 5. So no one is going to reach this in 2. I believe if it's playing directly downwind, you might have a few players that get it close to the surface, especially if they're, some of the longer players on tour, but I wouldn't count on that for your players. Hole 6 is 454, so it goes back the other direction, slightly downhill for your second shot. And this one's a pretty typical hole, right? It's a medium length par 4. It's going to require a short to mid iron in. Hole 7 is 414, so a little bit shorter, does play slightly uphill, so back the other direction. And depending on pin location, this can be a birdie look, but even the shorter holes here aren't super straightforward, right? You're not going to have a hole here where you're just like guaranteed a birdie look. Hole 8 is 233, so one of those longer par 3s. This one plays slightly downhill, but only slightly. It's a pretty flat piece of property over here and a tiny green complex. Hole 9, so finishing on the front 9, plays uphill for this hole and is sneaky difficult for just over 400 yards. The bunkers to the left and right get a lot of action off the tee, and just like all the bunker complexes, make that shot into the green extremely difficult. So once again, it's hit the fairway or die out here at hole number 9, which is just going to be a recurring theme throughout this video. Hole 10 is 446. I would say a larger landing area than most out here at the Copperhead course, but you don't want to miss in that bunker, and you surely don't want to miss in these trees with that rough. So it's once again, it's about as straightforward a hole as you're going to get out here, and still pretty tricky, not easy. Hole 11 is a par 5. This one is 565. So of the par 5s, this is the easiest on property in my opinion, just because the tee shot is a lot less demanding than the others. Hole 5, that uphill aspect really makes it tricky. A lot of guys hit bad tee shots there. Number one, with how small the landing area is, it's almost impossible to keep it in the short stuff, whereas 11 a little bit more straightforward and should give guys a lot of good looks at birdie. Hole 12 is 375. This is a forced layup. No one's going to hit driver here all week unless they're a complete idiot. And it's, again, just an iron off the tee and then a wedge in. Hole number 13 is a par 3. This one is 199. Water is surprisingly more in play here than you'd expect. Especially the front pin locations, you'll have guys that hit it short. But this back right pin location, anything spinny into the wind, and a lot of times the wind is coming in here on hole number 13, will lead to a watery grave. Hole 14 is a 600-yard par 5. This, in my opinion, would be like the third easiest par 5, so it's not easy by any means, but it's still a par 5. So scoreable look. A lot of guys will have to lay up over here to the left and leave themselves a little flip wedge in. Hole 15 is 208 yards. This one is just another tough, long par 3. Does play about 5 yards downhill, though. Hole 16 is my least favorite hole on property. It's where my outright went to die last year with Jordan Spieth, unfortunately. And yeah, this water on the right has a magnet in it. Jordan Spieth hit it in there. His week ended up ending with a bogey here. Did save bogey after hitting it directly into the water. So that was pretty impressive for him, but missed a putt for birdie out there in 17 after hitting a dart. And if you miss left here, you're screwed too. This rough over here is 4 inches. A lot of times you'll be behind this tree, which makes it even harder to try and get up near the surface. And even if you have an angle over here, which you'll get every once in a while, get an angle into this green complex, it's real hard to hold this surface. It's not large, it's super wide, which will help you a little bit, but it's so narrow that a lot of times you'll skip out into the rough over the green. Hole 17 is 212, so it's your final par 3. It's real tough unless they have this front pin location, which makes it a whole lot more simple. But any back location here at 17 is absolutely brutal. Almost impossible to get it close, which is why when Spieth hit it super close there at 17 to that back left pin, it was so disappointing that he didn't make it. And finally, hole 18 plays way back up the hill. This is maybe the most uphill hole on the entire property, maybe outside of hole 5, that other par 5 up the hill. The bunkers to the right are absolutely dead. You hit it into the bunker to the left, you have a slightly better chance, but still, you need to keep it in the short stuff to have any chance at making birdie at 18. And unless it's a front pin location, you're probably not getting that done. There's a huge slope in the middle of this green that makes it extremely difficult to get it to some of these back pin locations. And then the back left, where they'll have it on Sunday most likely, it is like the most brutal pin location that you can think of. So a lot of the slopes on these greens, you can't really get good perspective for because it's just this overhead, 2D view. But just know that almost every green complex here has significantly more slope than even what we had at the Players Championship. So it's a tricky track. I think of a lot of the world's best played here, they would end up getting exposed, which is likely why you see a lot of them sitting on the couch after that Players Championship. And now for some of our key stats around the Copperhead course. So now I'm going to touch on a few of the different metrics that you can use this week to go out there, identify some of your top plays, and of course to go out there and make your models yourself. So the first key stat I want to look at is fairway percentage. And a lot of that comes down to the driving accuracy, right? Just time and time again with the hole by hole breakdown. We talked about being in position with your off the tee shot. So in terms of guys that lead the field there, Ryan Armour, a player that has played here quite a bit over the last 5 years, is somebody that you could look at there. Aaron Rai, Alexander Bjork actually leads the tour in fairway percentage this year. Bryce Garnett, Ryan Palmer. But to try and find a few guys that have had some success here, we got to go a little bit further down the board. So fairway percentage is going to be helpful at this sort of event, but we also don't see a lot of your course history guys showing up here. So I would be a little bit hesitant before using it as your number one key stat, but it is going to be an aspect of my model this week for sure. Next up, we got green and regulation percentage. So trying to look at some of your better approach players. We're going to look at shots gained approach as well. So I think green and regulation percentage is just a good little added aspect that we can look at. And some of your leaders there, surprisingly, we got guys like Billy Horschel, Keith Mitchell at the top, Bryce Garnett showing up again, which, might be a little bit of a small sample thing. Also with that recent win on an alternate field event, probably boosting that quite a bit right there. But a few guys to watch out for. Aaron Rai showing up across both categories. In theory, really fits this golf course. Just hasn't played it before. Guys like Kevin Yu, really good in green and regulation percentage. Ben Silverman, he's had some decent form lately. Maybe not the best form, especially last week at the Players, but a bunch of made cuts out there before that. Victor Perez showing up at greens. Parker Cootie, young up-and-coming ball striker. Might be a good week to take a chance on him in some DFS lineups. Doug Gim showing up across both categories. Bud Cauley and his return to the tour has really been tearing it up with green and regulation percentage. Something you like to see. Joel Damon, green across both of those stat categories. That's going to serve him real well this week. Austin Cook, Ryan Palmer. I did not expect to see that one, especially with his approach stats. Has surprisingly been popping with the green and regulation percentage, and with the made cuts that he's had here, maybe worth a few looks there himself. Hisatune gaining in both categories. Matt Kuchar gaining in both categories. We're looking for consistency out here, right? We don't want to die by a death by 1,000 paper cuts. When you're missing in that 4-inch rough, when you're missing greens in that 4-inch rough, you're just going to get beat over the head by this golf course. It's that gnarly rough, very similar to what we had at the Arnold Palmer, which is why there is just such a premium on both of these categories. Akshay Bhatia, maybe my favorite play this week, has 2 missed cuts here, but we'll talk about him in our DFS preview. I've got a good feeling he's going to have a good week out there this week. Sam Ryder, of course, hits a ton of greens in regulation, showing up in the fairway category as well. And Ryan Moore, another guy that's showing up in both categories. That's probably worth noting because he has a couple good finishes around this golf course as well. A few other things I'm going to look at is just good old shots gained approach, right? Obviously, these green and regulation stats have a little bit of variance to them, right? They can be a little bit noisy, especially when we're looking at a smaller sample size. So a few things to look at here. Tony Finau, Cam Young have been striping it of late. Parker Cootie, no matter which way you look at it, has been really good from shots gained tee to green. So Cognizant gained 8.5 strokes. 6.8 at the Farmers in one of the stronger fields that we've had this year. Parker Cootie's looking like a little bit of a stud, so I'm liking that. Chris Gotterup showing up. Doug Gim, no matter which way you go out there and look at it, has been on fire lately. That is something that's going to be hard to ignore. Justin Thomas showing up there. Nick Taylor, more of your top-end guys, right, are starting to show up now that we're just looking at shots gained approach. But I think this green regulation, this fairway stuff, could be a really good way to try and find some of your sleepers. So, anytime we're at a course that prioritizes the ball striking, off the tee shots gained, approach are always going to be at the top of my model. But, I wanted to look at a few of those other categories for maybe some of our sleepers. In terms of shots gained off the tee, I'm a little bit more worried about the accuracy this week than the distance, but distance can never hurt you, no matter what event that you're at. So there are some of your leaders there. You got Cam Champ up there, Toasty, he's a striper off the tee. Don't love the approach play for Toasty, though, or for Cameron Champ for that matter. But Rico Hoey, he hasn't played that much, but when he's played, he's been really good, especially over there at the Cognizant Classic. Keith Mitchell continues to be an absolute statistical monster. It hasn't panned out to like a win yet, right? Or even like, a lot of top 5 finishes like you'd expect for it when he's hitting the ball this well. But if he continues to do this with the ball striking stats, it's going to come for Keith Mitchell. So I wasn't planning on a huge investment in Keith Mitchell, but the more and more we look at the stats, that's probably going to change by the time we get to lock. A few other guys that pop across both stat categories, right? So Kevin Yu, really good off the tee and on the approach. Xander Schauffele, unsurprisingly, gaining across all 4 stat categories. Cameron Young has gainer in both ball striking categories. Johnny Vegas, too. Victor Perez. Joel Damon, who we've been waiting for this comeback for a while now, right, is finally starting to show some form. Daniel Berger, Aaron Rye. Aaron Rye showed up in all 4 stat categories. Once again, showing up here, Doug Gim, Tony Finau. These are all the kind of guys that are going to be priorities for me this week, whether it's outright betting, whether it's for DFS. These are the guys that are going to be at the top of my model. So it's all about the ball striking this week. In fact, putting, I could almost not give 2 shits about. So it'll be a part of my model. It'll probably be like 10, 15% in my personal exposure, but far from the end all be all. The last stat we'll look at, and I don't think this is like an around the green week or anything like that, but if you need to go out there and break ties and you've got 2 guys that model very consistently when it comes to their ball striking stuff, maybe their course history, right, is even pretty similar over the last 5 years, well, around the green might be a little bit of a tiebreaker for you. There's real difficult shots around the green, so I think if you look at around the green on courses with deep rough, that would probably be an even better idea. But if we're just looking at recent form for around the green, guys like Ben Griffin are up there. Zach Blair, who also played pretty well here last year with that top 10 finish. Maybe a little bit intriguing, especially with how accurate he is off the tee. Guys like Sanjay, good around the green. Robert McIntyre. I have to say, McIntyre, very disappointing start here to 2024. But this is a golf course that potentially fits his game. Mav McNeely with the around the green week of the decade at the Players. You can see he's still lost, lost strokes on approach, was hardly a gainer off the tee. Not even his best putting week, but gained 8 strokes around the green. That's pretty next level stuff. So again, it's not the main stat I'm looking at by any means. Same thing with putting, right? I can almost care less about the putting this week. It's an approach and an off the tee week. And I think a good way to find some of the sleepers would be to look at those fairway percentage in green and regulation stats. We'll look at a few comp courses here too for this week. So first off, we got the Arnold Palmer, which, it's got that same gnarly rough as what we're going to have this week. Florida golf course with some water in play. You got those Florida breezes at both golf courses, and agronomy is a little bit different from track to track out there, but consistent enough that you can use it for some of your analysis. So if you're looking for a Florida swing, event to compare to for this week, I think API is probably your best bet. Another course I'm going to look at is Quail Hollow, so the home of the Wells Fargo Championship, which might seem like a little bit of an outside comp, but a lot of it's because of the off the tee play. You've got those narrow chutes with all the trees around it over there at Quail Hollow, narrow fairways, long rough, and tricky undulated greens. So the agronomy is a little bit different, kind of like we have for the API, so it's not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but in terms of like your skill set, right, the guys that are showing up at both golf courses, you see a lot of that crossover success. So I think Quail Hollow, API, right, make a little bit of sense from that. And then the last comp I'll give is the Cognizant Classic, right, Honda Classic. And this is probably my least favorite of the 3. So my main 2 comps would be those, top 2, just because we have enough in common to say that they're good comps. Cognizant Classic, right, similar part of the schedule. Off the tee accuracy is important at both golf courses. Just a little bit of a different reason why, right? Cognizant, you want to avoid all that water off the tee, so that's why accuracy matters. Whereas this week, you want to avoid all that 4-inch rough and setting up horrible angles with the trees. So those would be my top 3 comps. Again, Cognizant Classic maybe a little bit less emphasized than those top 2, but looking at those leaderboards for some crossover success, I think would suit you pretty well this week. That's all I've got for this week's course preview. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead and smash that like button for me, and also comment down below what you've got as your winning score. And just like the last few weeks where we've been giving away a Patreon membership for anyone that can guess the correct winning score, go ahead and give me guys your thoughts down below. So your winning score prediction, I'm going to go with 12 under par myself, but go ahead, submit your score down below, and earn a free chance to earn a month of that Patreon. On there, of course, is where I post all my analysis, whether it's for DFS, fantasy, betting, props, you name it. All of that behind the scenes info is posted there to give you guys access to that spreadsheets, all that information to do your research and make your life a little bit easier. And if you want access to that, sounds like something up your alley, well, either join yourself or second off, make sure to get into that giveaway. I appreciate all the support here in the channel. Again, smash that like button if you haven't already, and subscribe so you don't miss any of the videos and live streams throughout the week. We'll have a DFS and betting preview dropping a little bit later this evening, and then throughout the week, fantasy content, live streams for the different showdown slates, rounds 2 through 4, also over there on the prop side. And on Wednesday, our flagstick live stream, which will be at 7 p.m. Eastern time, covering everything you need to know for this event. So make sure to stop on by for those. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss any of them when they happen. And looking forward to having ourselves a week out there at the Valspar Championship.